This is my mother's story, but I'll be damned if she lets me forget it. When I was a teenager, my parents were quite wealthy. My dad was a salesman for a high-end Chinese tech company, and he would regularly take trips overseas. There was one time when my mother chose to go with him. She had never been to China before, and this was an opportunity to get out of Hong Kong and experience the culture of the mainland. After a luxurious thought about the vacation, my parents hopped on the plane and headed to Shenzhen. Now my mom is a pretty streetwise lady by US standards. She's managed to survive some pretty intense living conditions and navigate the ghetto well enough. So I think she got incredibly arrogant here. At some point when my dad was speaking to his superiors in a meeting, she asked if she could head out alone to do some shopping. My dad's boss was apprehensive about that and told her if she really wanted to go to take down his number in case anything happened. While shopping, she was lured to a back alley shop that sold a pretty diverse amount of designer knockoffs, bootleg DVD box sets, etc. I'm a huge TV fan, and apparently, she thought this would be a great opportunity to pick me up the first 5 seasons of Scrubs on DVD. It was nothing crazy. There are places like this all over China, but apparently she chose the wrong back alley shop when she was finished making her purchase. A legitimate-looking cab pulled up and offered her a ride. The cab ride was quiet, and it didn't take my mom long to realize that something was wrong. The man wasn't driving her back to where she came from, and I think he expected her not to remember the way back to her hotel. There was a second man in the passenger seat with a stern look. The men spoke to each other in Chinese and didn't even acknowledge her when she spoke to them. They just kept driving. It took her less than half a mile before she tried to escape the car, but the doors were locked from the inside. The men then began yelling at her in Chinese and threatening her. They took her purse and removed the money from inside it and began talking amongst themselves. With one last resort, my mom called my dad's boss, who began speaking to them in Chinese via speakerphone. The men were spooked almost immediately. They stopped the car, grabbed my mom, and literally threw her out onto the street. Then they tossed money at her. When she got back, she learned a few things. Firstly, the money they threw at her was counterfeit. They kept her real money. Secondly, the men were part of the Chinese mafia, according to my dad's boss. People have a tendency to go missing in situations like that all the time, particularly tourists. He said that she had not made that phone call. She would most likely be dead or abducted. The fake cab scam was actually quite a common method of these abductions. Thirdly, my dad's boss has some sort of questionable but scary pull among the criminal underground of mainland China, or at least he knew how to put the fear of God into them. She still has no idea what he said to them on the phone. Even to this day, she gives me a lot of black. She says that Scrubs box set nearly cost me my life. A few years ago, when my younger cousin Jing and I were playing around at my house in the suburb of China, we were playing in my mama's bigger bed on the double deck. There was a cabinet right next to my mom's bed, but her room was small, so the cabinet was always locked and ropes tied it up at the knobs. My cousin and I accidentally hit the cabinet and part of it broke off. We tried to fix it, but we just put it where it belonged after failing miserably. One of our cousins named Fang, who was also in the room doing her studies, told us that a girl had passed away in that cabinet a long time ago, and no one truly ever figured out what happened to her. Jing and I froze. I looked at him with a frightened face. We went to Jing's house, which was located just behind ours. We told my aunt, who was Jing's mom, about what had happened, and she told us that we should always behave and be good so that nothing bad would ever happen. She was referring to spirits and how we should respect them. Me and Jing never talked about that ever since. But a couple of years ago, when my cousin Fang and her family moved out when my sister was at a sleepover at her friend Charlie's place, I was left alone with my grandma. She sleeps downstairs and I upstairs, and that night I was playing a game called Armies of Magic on Facebook. I kept on playing until I realized it was midnight. I didn't want to be scolded for staying up too late, so I turned the computer off and the lights too. I slept on my mom's bed for the night. I was sleeping sideways, facing away from the cabinet, when I suddenly felt a weird presence of some sort, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I closed my eyes, then felt the weight of the bed shift as if someone had sat down on it. I opened my eyes slowly. I saw a girl facing away from me, sitting on the bed. From what I could see, I didn't recognize her, but only moments later she vanished. I was frightened and my heart was pounding, yet I still managed to get some sleep a couple of hours later. I didn't tell anyone about this experience except for my classmates. They looked concerned when I told them, but some of them tried to make a logical explanation about it. But none of them fit in with what really happened. A couple of years afterward, things got weirder. Whenever no one is upstairs, there are always sounds of someone walking around. Sometimes when it's sunny,
There would always be a shadow of someone. Sometimes there would be walking sounds on the roof. Sometimes I could hear tapping, whispering, walking, singing, or knocking sounds. After a few months, things got even worse. She began showing herself. She looks related to me, if that makes sense, as if she was in our family. But she was pale and her eyes were so baggy. She wore a white robe at all times. One night after I turned off the living room lights, I saw her running towards me holding up a knife. I screamed, but she faded away immediately. I hope things don't get worse. I don't think there's any room for it to get worse unless she actually manages to hurt me somehow. Well, wish me luck, I guess.
My name is Aiden. I live in rural China with my parents and two brothers. One weekend when my parents were gone, my grandma had us take a little trip over to her house for the weekend. She has money, so she lives on a nice, big private property, and she has things for us to do there. It was the closest thing to a vacation that we'd get all summer. I'm the oldest, and I was 15 at the time, so I guess my parents still didn't fully trust us to be left home alone at that time. Me and my younger brother were playing basketball out front until the sun was just starting to set. After that, we went inside and ate dinner. My grandma later called me down from my room because we left the door to the storeroom outside open, as we usually go in there to play. That confused me because we didn't even go into the building to play that day. I went downstairs to the parlor room window where I could see that the door was in fact open. It was dark out there now, but the light above the door was on and made it easy to see the opening. I called up to my two brothers, who both claimed they didn't open it. I expressed concern to my grandma, suggesting maybe somebody had broken in. She overreacted, as she does with everything. I went to the front door and looked out the glass up top and literally screamed. My grandma yelled what's wrong and started freaking out. I told her I saw a man just standing at the bottom step of the front porch. She came over to look for herself and then started yelling to call the police. I told her I'm going to go outside and confront him, but she literally would not let me. She would cry and beg me not to open the door, and even tugged on my arm each time I tried to grab the doorknob. I finally agreed to call the cops instead and waited out. My grandma got on the phone, almost crying to the operator, kind of overreacting by stating that somebody's going to break into our house. I sat in the dining room looking out the window, watching the man. My grandma wouldn't allow my two younger brothers to even come downstairs. The blackness of the man's figure standing out there was the only thing darker than the surrounding ambience. Finally, the man turned and walked past the window I was sitting by, seemingly circling to the back of the house. We tried to follow through the house, watching him through every window possible until we lost him completely. We were in the den of the house, looking through the back window, but he was nowhere to be seen. We had nothing to tell the police when they arrived other than someone was standing at our front porch. They apparently had been in our storeroom building, and they walked around back near the trees and disappeared. Nothing unusual was found in the store building, and they couldn't find the man anywhere on the property. They told us to call them back if we see them again, because realistically, there was nothing they could do. My grandma insisted we stay upstairs, and she would sleep down there for the night. Me and my brothers were playing on the GameCube that we brought along upstairs at around 10 o'clock when we heard my grandmother's heart-chilling scream coming from downstairs. We all panicked and sprinted all the way downstairs, where we saw our grandma pointing into the pitch-black office. She said there was someone in there. I closed the door and told my brothers to help me lean up against it, while grandma once again called the cops. The cops arrived, and to our surprise, found the man laying on her grandma's office couch. He was very open about his intentions, spending the night in the warmth of the house. There were 2 windows that you couldn't exit from in that office, meaning the door we were blocking was the only exit. He admitted he simply entered the house through the den window, which was not locked. My grandma is 92 now. She's always been a skittish, worrisome little thing, but this event only made her that much more paranoid with just about everything.